So I had this idea. Every once in a long while, I can't find a handle, so I hot glue a razor blade between two pieces of scrap plastic or scrap wood. And recently I was working out of town and I didn't have my typical tool set, so I made one of these. But I was also hanging around with the folks from Total Boat. And we were just brainstorming and discussing products. And I said, wouldn't it be funny if we had a silicone mold that you could inset a razor blade in, and when you had extra resin left over, you could pour the resin into this hollow mold and you'd end up with a disposable shop razor. And what you see there is the model that Aaron did based on some sketches I did. And then we sent it to the ELEGOO printer, the ELEGOO Mars 2, I think it is. And there you see we've resin printed it. And Aaron's going to describe a little bit more about the resin print now. We just watched it print here. You just washed it in the water. What happens now?
Now you have to pop it off the build plate. I take it over to the ultrasonic to give it another rinse, and then we cure it with UV light. A friend of mine showed me the best way to do it. Actually bevel down, and you can leverage it off like that.
Thank you. Very good.
And now it's ready for to jump in the ultrasonic. So we just take it over there.
And that just gets off all the uncured residue.
Absolutely, just rinses it all off. This is water washable resin, otherwise we would be using alcohol, but because it's water washable, we can just use regular water. I just put it on for like 5 minutes. Yeah, after that we dry all the water off, throw it in the UV light, and it cures up nice and hard. Yeah, you gotta get off the excess water so that the UV light can get all the way to the part. So right now what we have is, it's in the UV curing stage. We're putting it on for 5 minutes, probably more time than it actually needs. But because we're going to be molding it, I want it to be really hard and make sure there's no uncured resin.
Very good. All right. Once that's done, I'll cut it up and put the blade in it. And so now what you see is the print out of the resin, and I install a razor blade in it, because if I'm going to make a silicone mold, we need to have the pocket for the razor blade in place. So this is my model. With the razor blade in place, I fill in some of those cracks off camera with some auto body filler. And now I'm making a silicone mold. Now, one thing I learned from Bob over at I Like to Make Stuff was that this water-based resin printer has sulfur in it. And you got to be careful because only certain silicones work with a sulfur-based material. And in this case, we needed to use a tin-based silicone, and that is Mold Max 30 from Smooth On, and that's what you see me using here. And if you're ever going to mix silicone, it's really important to get your mix right. And this is a 10-to-1 by weight, so I just throw it on the scale, whatever that number is, I put 10% more in, and then I mix it up. And it's really important to mix it up till it's one consistent color, which is the main reason why they give you something that's going to change the color, so you can visibly tell how well it's mixed. And I pour it in here. You see me pour it in my mold box, which is just hot glued together. And then it's really important to use a compression can or to compress the air. It's a molding pot, is what we call it. And the compressed air gets rid of all the bubbles. So now it's 24 hours later, and you see me popping open the silicone molds, and it's just solid. There are no air bubbles in it. It's really important, if you can, to compress your molds while they're drying, or vacuum them, either one, compression or vacuum. And you'll notice I made a mark on my mold so I knew where to cut. I didn't want to cut from the razor blade side. It would have interfered with putting that razor blade insert in there. We actually ultimately ended up making a short one and a long one, so you'll be able to see those. And now I'm using Total Boat High Performance Resin, and I'm using it in my pre-mixed dispenser, which works amazing. I was really cold in the shop, even though the heat was on, so it kind of inhibited the performance of everything, the silicone, the epoxy, everything. It just slowed it all down, that's all. And I'm using some dyes, some coloring. And now I can't forget to put the razor blades in there. That's the whole reason for this. So when I made molds of these models and I pulled them out and took the razor blade with it, so that left a space inside the silicone. And you see I make these little wooden clips that keep the cracks closed. And now I'm filling this in. So I was being a little bit lazy in the beginning of making this, and my silicone held a lot of air bubbles for the resin. And I was hoping that I kept poking it in there with a stick, getting rid of the bubbles, but a lot of the bubbles kind of stayed in the lettering, the deep lettering you could see there. In this case, I ended up putting some pearlescent coloring in there. It's this black diamond stuff you can get from Total Boat. Comes in all types of colors. So that was clear with the black diamond in it, but you could see a lot of the air bubbles kind of still stuck in the letters, kinda. And so I decided it would be probably imperative to cast it and then also compress it in the container again, in the air tank. And you'll see me do that in a minute. So this is the red batch again, and this is where you'll be able to see some more of the air bubbles. And like a lot of the products I begin to develop, you got to iterate. You got to make and make and make and make more, and then figure out and try and solve some of the problems. You got to make sure there's no moisture in your cup, otherwise you're going to get foamy resin. That's my problem. And you just got to keep making them and just seeing where you're getting improvements, where you're getting improved performance, and what you've done to make that happen. And then also look for opportunities to change your product down the road, because this is the first batch of this product. Ultimately, what I see this product really being is the mold. So I'm going to try and figure out ways to manufacture the mold. It's important to use clean cups. Total Boat gives me hundreds of cups, but I still am so cheap that I keep reusing the same cups. And you see there's flakes and debris in the resin there. But I have to keep reminding myself I'm making disposable shop knives. So not trying to make a perfect product. Just trying to make something that's usable and somewhat handsome. And again, here I should have compressed. It was after this batch when I realized I really do need to put these back into the compression tank. See a lot of air bubbles in this batch. And that's the clear high performance resin with just a big squirt of blue in there. And it takes about 24 hours for it to really cure, especially in this weather. It's pretty consistently 30 degrees in my shop, which is definitely not good for any type of epoxy. You need to really be somewhere in the 70 degree Fahrenheit range for good epoxy performance. And here we have I put some yellow dye in this one, and this is the one that I actually compressed. This is so far the best shot I get. I put it into the compression tank. And you notice when we 3D printed the original form, I left a spot to glue into the mold, which is really important because having it integrated into the 3D print makes it a lot easier to set up a silicone mold. Now, out of the 5 silicone molds you see there, I really just had 2 good prints. I just kept making molds over the same prints. And now here you see I'm putting them in the compression tank. And I put them in the compression tank overnight. And so when you see me close them and then open them back up, it's 24 hours later. The one important thing to remember is if you're going to use resin, you cannot rush it. Especially if you're going to use a high performance resin like this. Takes a really long time to cure, and of course I said it before, I'll say it again, you really need to be in a warm climate or at least a heated room, a heated garage. And I put a freeze frame on that so you can see how much better of a casting you get. And you'll notice that some of the resin got pushed down into the razor blade slot, and you can see what a much better casting I got. I also did a little bit of a trick here with this particular batch is I put it in my even heat oven and I toasted it to about 120 degrees, and that really cured the resin in the cold weather, so I was able to pull these out and they were pretty rock solid. So this is the best batch so far. And I've been making these all week long, experimenting with them. That's why you'll notice eventually all the different colors laying around the shop, because I just keep experimenting. Trying different mixes and different colors. And now here I'm just getting like a lime green by adding yellow and green together. The green alone would have been a super, super dark hunter green, but I squirted a little bit of yellow in it and it gives me this kind of more limey green, kind of yellow green. And again, I compressed these, but I think I had some moisture on my mixing stick because it foamed up a little bit. So I throw these into the compression tank overnight. It's really important to set it and forget it. You can't rush this process. You really have to set it and forget it. And then once it was cured, even though it was cured to the touch, I still put them in the oven about 20 hours later, and I set the oven to go to 125 degrees Fahrenheit for about 1 hour. And the oven will go to 125 degrees, and then it will stay warm. So I left them in there. And there's my original printed sample, which obviously looks the best. This is the best sample that I got in my experimentation all week long. This batch of yellow in the compression tank. There's the pearlized one. You could see some of the bubbles. The next batch we're going to make, definitely going to have a much shallower logo. The shallow logo would not hold nearly as many bubbles as I was holding in the smaller version of this knife. This knife we made longer, and we made the middle of the body a little thicker versus the small one. You could see the shadow of the razor blade through it. That's how thin it was. And those letters were very squared off. Any squares inside of a silicone mold will trap and hold bubbles if you're not compressing the air inside of it. Thank you, Total Boat, and thank you for watching. I hope you learned something here.